Good evening, everyone. It is very good to see you all. I usually don't begin with something funny, but I can't resist with the song that was just sang. It's not a funny song, but the very first phrase in that song is "Joy to the world, the Lord has come." And when we moved to Moldova in January of 2012, the very first hymn that we sang in the very first Lord's Day service was that hymn, "Joy to the world, the Lord has come." And I thought that the song leader, Sergei, some of you know him, was being funny by saying "Joy to the world, the Lord has come" the very first Sunday that we moved there. And so I asked him about that afterwards, and he said, "What are you talking about?" In the Russian, which is the language that they use in worshiping there, the hymn actually says, "Joy to the world, the Lord will come." So it's looking forward to the second coming instead of thinking about and singing about the first coming. But anyways, I thought that was humorous that Jason led that hymn and the connection to our first Sunday there. It is so good to be with you all. Again, thank you for being here, for making the choice to come and to be a part of this worship service. We are in a worship service, and this is going to be a little bit different kind of lesson than we might traditionally have during a worship service, and I'll explain more about that in just a moment. I appreciate the scripture reading that was done just a moment ago from Philippians chapter 4. We find in the book of Philippians that Paul was excited and thankful and even rejoiced and prayed to God with thanksgiving and joy on behalf of the Christians in Philippi because, as he says in chapter 1 and verse 5, they had a partnership with him in the gospel. They had a fellowship with him in the preaching and teaching of the gospel. And as we read just a moment ago from chapter 4, verses 17 and following, we see there that they had sent to Paul some financial support multiple times for the work that he was doing. And when we think about the relationship with the church that Paul had, the relationship with the church in Philippi that Paul had, I know I can feel something very similar in regards to the church here, other churches, and other individuals, including some individuals here, throughout the last couple of decades or so that have helped in our support in the preaching and teaching of the gospel, not just locally in various places throughout the United States, but even in Moldova. The trips to Moldova, while we lived in Moldova, work related to Eastern Europe, again, several have been involved with that. And of course, the church here recently provided some funds for the trip that we took in August to Moldova. And so as Paul was thankful for the church in Philippi and the fellowship that the church in Philippi had with him in the preaching and teaching of the gospel, I'm thankful for you. Thank you for your desire to be engaged in helping people in the preaching and teaching of the gospel. In Acts 18 and verse 5, after Paul had received financial support, he was able to devote himself entirely to the preaching and teaching of the gospel. And you all have made that possible in part for me in the last several years, and again, in connection with these trips as well. So thank you for that. And I wanted to begin with that kind of thanksgiving. And we'll come back actually to that passage in just a moment. But for now, turn over to Acts chapter 13. Acts chapter 13. We find that Barnabas had gone up to the city of Antioch. The church in Jerusalem sent him there. When he arrived and he saw the good things that were going on, he actually went and grabbed Saul of Tarsus, and Saul came down and was with him. And they were with the church in Antioch for at least a year. The end of chapter 11 tells us. And then in Acts chapter 13, verses 1 through 3, we read this. Now there were these prophets and teachers in the church at Antioch: Barnabas, Simeon called Niger, Lucius the Cyrenian, Manaen, a close friend of Herod the Tetrarch from childhood, and Saul. While they were serving the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, "Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them." Then after they had fasted and prayed and placed their hands on them, they sent them off. This is where we find Paul and Barnabas going on their first missionary journey. And we find that Acts chapters 13 and 14 catalog for us their trip and some of their work, including some of the preaching and teaching that was done in that work, but especially the reception that the gospel received in the various locations that Paul and Barnabas traveled on this trip. And so at the end of chapter 14, in Acts chapter 14, verses 26 and 27. Luke tells us here that from Italia they sailed back to Antioch, where they had been commended to the grace of God for the work they had now completed. So again, the church in Antioch sent them on this trip. When they finished that trip several months later, they came back to Antioch, where they had been commended to the grace of God for this work. When they arrived and gathered the church together, they reported all the things God had done with them, and that he had opened a door of faith for the Gentiles. We see here that Paul gave a report on the work, the evangelistic work that he had been doing in other places. And that's really what we're going to try to do this evening, is to give a report on the recent trip to Moldova. This was not a sermon that Paul preached in the way that he would normally preach a sermon when he was assembled together with a local church. And so this won't be a normal sermon. This will be more of a report. We're going to talk about some biblical passages. We already have. We will talk about a few more. But again, it'll be just a little bit different. So if you're not familiar with this kind of approach, I just want to warn you ahead of time, it's not a regular sermon. I do want to go back here to this slide. Some had asked about the location of Moldova. Some of you may not be familiar with that. Sometimes I have a longer introduction as to where it is and how the work got started there. But for now, I'll just mention, as you can see here, it is between Romania and Ukraine, a small country about a fourth the size of the state of Tennessee, and in total square footage, about the size of Maryland, a third of the size of Indiana. So it's a small country, about 4 million people total in population, though only about 3 million or so are probably living in Moldova at any given time. The rest are scattered throughout the world in various locations. The Lord's Church started in Chisinau back in the early 90s, and at the current moment, according to what we know, there are 4 churches that meet in the 4 largest cities. The city of Chisinau, which is the capital city that we just mentioned, and then in the north, in the city of Belt. Down here, this says Tighina, which is the Romanian word for this town. You'll see me talk about the church in Bendare or Bendari. So there's a church there, and there's a church that meets in Tiraspol as well. So again, 4 churches are there. What I want to do here in the beginning is just kind of catalog some of the things that we did. We'll pick up on some of the themes and topics that we preached on and taught on as we were there. This was a trip that Philip Stuckey and myself made together. I don't know how many of you know Philip Stuckey. Some of you do. This was Phil's 3rd trip with me. This is us meeting up for the first time at the airport in Chicago. Philip lives in Edna, Texas. He is a preaching shepherd with the church there in Edna, Texas. And again, he's made a few trips with me. Philip and I are really good friends, and it's always a joy to work with him. So from Chicago, there on the evening of Sunday the 22nd, on Monday the 23rd, we landed here in Istanbul. And from Istanbul, we flew into Chisinau, and here's Sergei Korchmaro picking us up at the airport. So we went to bed shortly after we got in, of course, as you would do after a long flight. On the next morning, Tuesday, this passage here really struck us, and I'll explain why in just a moment. In Mark chapter 6, verses 8 and 9, speaking of Jesus, Mark says that he instructed them to take nothing for the journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, and to put on sandals, but not to wear 2 tunics. I have traveled enough, and after having lived in Moldova for a while, I don't take a whole lot of clothes with me. So everything that I needed clothes-wise was in my carry-on bag. Philip, on the other hand, is still learning, and so he's got more clothes than I take with me, and so he has some in his check bag or in his carry-on bag, but not very many. Most of his clothes were actually in his checked bag. Well, our checked luggage did not make it. I had a checked bag, but all that was in there was basically gifts and things for the Moldovan Christians and some supplies we needed for the lectures that I'll talk about in just a moment. So Philip had no clothes. And so we had to go on Tuesday morning, the first thing, to find some clothes for Philip to be able to continue with the trip. When we finished that expedition, which I will say, it's not like going down to Walmart. This was probably a 3-hour expedition for us because we had to go to multiple stores to try to find multiple items of clothing that Phil needed. And so it took some time that morning. The rest of that day, we finished the conference material for printing. And just a quick word about conference. If you're not familiar with that word, we typically don't use that word. We talk about gospel meetings. Sometimes we talk about lectureships. When we started holding lectureships in Moldova back in 2006, January of 2006, we learned that both in Romanian and in Russian, the two primary languages that we're dealing with there, that the better word for what we were doing is a word that sounds a lot like conference, and that we would translate as conference into English. And so just for ease of going back and forth between the languages, we use the word conference a lot. But again, it's just a lectureship. And we do print some material for them. We have an entire book that is printed with various things in it. I'll explain more about that in just a moment. Later that day, we went to the Korchmaro's house as they practiced and extended some hospitality toward us, and we were thankful for that. But then we got busy with our series of lessons, not in the lectureship, not in the conference, but with the church in Chisinau at their meeting place. Philip and I had decided we were going to present 8 lessons, 2 lessons at a time on Tuesday evening, Wednesday evening, and then 4 more on Sunday. And here is what we had planned to preach, again on Evidences for Jesus. Was Jesus a historical person? Was Jesus really resurrected? Examining alternatives to the resurrection, implications of the resurrection, Jesus' miracles, Jesus' claims, Jesus' view of the Old Testament, and reactions to Jesus. Now, we wanted to do this because we need to be thinking about these particular subjects. Both Philip and I think that when we study with someone and we want to talk about evidences, we want to talk about helping someone who is not a believer, someone who is agnostic, someone who is even atheistic, and we want them to be a believer. We believe that is, Philip and I believe that we need to begin with the resurrection of Jesus. Because if we can show someone from all of the evidence that is available to us that Jesus was really resurrected, then everything else falls into place. Everything Jesus said that he was is true. Everything Jesus said about God is true. Everything Jesus said about the inspiration of the Old Testament is true. Everything Jesus wants us to do is also true. And so we want to begin with the resurrection of Jesus. And if you're here this evening or you're listening to this lesson and you're on the fence as to whether or not you believe in God, as to whether or not you want to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, I want to suggest to you to begin with the resurrection. There's a lot of stuff out there that we could talk about regarding evolution versus creation, things regarding prophecy, miracles, things along those lines. But I really think that the best place to start is with the resurrection of Jesus. We started with the softball lesson. Was Jesus a historical person? Virtually no one denies that. There's too much evidence pointing in that direction. But then we quickly got to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So here is Phil presenting his lesson. Those of you that are familiar with the biblical text, you may have noticed in Luke chapter 4 that Jesus sat down to teach in the synagogue, and yet in Acts chapter 13, Paul stood up to teach in the synagogue. And that's because they were in 2 different locations where there were two different traditions going on. And it actually shows that Luke knows what he's talking about in writing both of those situations. Well, in Moldova, for various reasons, oftentimes we will sit when we teach and when we preach instead of standing up. Again, there are multiple reasons for that. I did get to the point when we lived there, I purchased a podium. Actually, it's that podium that the projector is on, and used it and stood up. It was just more natural for me, being an American, to stand up as I was preaching and teaching. We also, I'll just explain this in case you're curious about this. This is actually E Sword, and within E Sword there is the Russian translation. Actually, that's the Russian translation on that side, and that's the Romanian translation on that side. Again, Russian and Romanian are the 2 primary languages. The official language of Moldova is basically Romanian, and many people speak Romanian. But as I've already mentioned, the church worships in Russian. There are a lot of Russian-speaking people in Moldova. Moldova was a part of the Soviet Union at one point, and there are other connections there as well. But I also want to let you know that Romanian and Russian are as different as English and Russian are. And so if knowing English doesn't help you to know Russian, knowing Romanian doesn't help you know Russian either, and vice versa. They are two entirely different families of languages. But again, because we have native Russian-speaking people and native Romanian-speaking people within the audience, we use both of those. Now, typically, all of the people in the audience can understand both. They are bilingual, oftentimes trilingual, or even more. But again, since their mother tongue may be one or the other, we try to provide both. Here that same evening, I am also presenting the lesson on Was Jesus Really Resurrected? On the following day, that Wednesday, one of the things that we sometimes do, we weren't aware of this before going into the trip, but thanks to the financial support of various people, we were able to provide some Bibles for them. Sergey asked if we could provide some new Bibles. They'd been giving some of them out. We needed some more Bibles, and so we go to the Bible bookstore here, picture of Sergey and myself, and we're looking over the Bibles, determining which ones we want to try to get. And this is a picture from the Bible bookstore's website of the Bibles that we chose. These are very good-looking Bibles. I think they were $7 a piece, so they weren't very expensive. Here's a picture of the inside. Now, this may look like a very simple layout to you, and it is a very simple layout. But this actually is a much better Bible than what they had been using in the past for multiple reasons. One of the primary reasons is that this Bible actually provides cross-references for them. They don't have, in a lot of their Bibles, cross-references. Something as simple and as basic to help us in our study of God's Word and our understanding of God's Word, such as cross-references, they don't have in many of their Bibles. You can find some of them, and again, thankfully, these Bibles that were actually just recently printed, recently formatted in this way as well, provided cross-references. And so I was really excited when I saw that. There's kind of a close-up version as well, though it's a little bit blurry. And some of the other features involve the actual font that is used, the colors and all of that, to just make it a whole lot easier for them to read than some of their previous Bibles. So we purchased about 30 of those, and we were excited to be able to do that. Later that evening, we come back. This is Wednesday evening, and again, we're continuing our series on evidences for Jesus. And we don't have a picture of Phil from that particular evening. I included this shot from a little bit farther back just to kind of show you what's going on with the church's meeting place here. And I say church's meeting place. Technically, this isn't this doesn't belong to the church in the way that we think about this piece of property belonging to the church here at Jere Whitson. This apartment belongs to the Christians. There were several Christians going back now probably 20 years or so that pulled some funds together, purchased this apartment, and then gave it to the Christians to use in any way that the Christians needed to use it. And obviously, they needed a place for the church to be able to meet, and so the church meets here. This is actually, again, an apartment that has been converted, and so what we're seeing here, you can't really see this, but right along here, there was a wall, and the floor level is actually different, right along here. And so they tore out this wall and made this larger room here for the church in Chisinau to be able to meet. There are Christians and non-Christians present here, and there are several more that are joined by Zoom, by Skype, and by Viber. They actually connect to all three of those programs for various reasons for people to join during that study. Actually, this is Sergey's daughter, Vicky, who is interpreting for me at the table. That's not Sergey. And Sergey was interpreting for me. And as we were going through the lesson, he had his phone on the table, and his phone rang, and it said, "Mom." And he just shut it off. And I was like, "Sergey, that's your mom. You need to make sure you get that. There may be something serious going on. She has some heart problems and some other things." So he stepped out, and his daughter, Vicky, took over for a little while. Sergey's mother, Vera, was okay. She actually had forgotten about the study because I don't normally meet on Wednesdays. They normally meet for midweek Bible studies on Tuesdays and Fridays. But again, nothing was wrong there. On Thursday, we actually get to have the lectureship, the conference, the Thursday through Saturday that I had mentioned earlier. Here's a picture of Phil and I taking some public transportation on the way from where our apartment was that we had rented to the location of the conference. This was the 15th annual, should have been the 16th, Again, we started these back in January of 2006, and we've had one every year except for last year because of COVID. And so we're playing catch-up, or really not playing catch-up. We just had to bump everything back as far as plans go. So this was our 15th opportunity to provide these lessons. And what we do, and you'll see some pictures here in a minute that will help you to understand kind of what's going on. But John Smith, kind of the mastermind behind some of this, and he had made several trips and realized that while there were churches at that time in just 2 cities that we knew about, the Christians in these locations did not see each other. We think about traveling for gospel meetings, although oftentimes we don't travel very much to gospel meetings, but we at least have the opportunity, we're at least familiar with the idea. They don't have that kind of thing where they can just hop in the car or hop on public transportation and be able to go over a few minutes and visit with another congregation. And so many of these Christians who were first-generation Christians, some of them had been Christians for 5, 10, even 15 years, had never met another Christian outside of the Christians in their local congregation. That's difficult for me to fathom. I mean, just today, we were with the church in Galena, Indiana this morning, and now we're with the church here. And it's not uncommon for us to be able to visit. So we wanted to be able to provide that opportunity for them. It's actually also more effective to be able to bring all of them together in one place and deliver lots of information that hopefully is helpful for them. We'll talk some about that in just a moment as well, instead of going to all of the different places and providing that same information. So this is a big deal for the Moldovans because, again, this is one of the only times they get to see other Christians outside of their local congregation each year. For this particular year's conference, our theme was the Gospel of Mark. And so we broke up the Gospel of Mark into these 13 lessons. We also had 3 Q&A sessions and 2 opportunities for singing. And I'll talk more about that here in just a moment as well. Again, Phil and I just divided the material up in various ways. And this was something that we wanted to do to encourage them to better understand Mark's gospel. And one of the themes of Mark's gospel is serving or being a disciple. And so what does that mean? What does that look like? What does Jesus ask of us? And hopefully it was an encouragement to them. If you've never studied the Gospel of Mark, I would encourage you to do so. There are lots of good things in there about what it means to be a disciple, the things that we need to do, the things that we should expect that may happen as we follow Jesus, but then ultimately, of course, the rewards that we receive in Jesus when we are a true disciple of Jesus. And so we had several lectures on Thursday, some more on Friday, and then some on Saturday morning as well. Here's a picture of some of the individuals who were there for the conference, some of the Moldovans. There are individuals here from 4 different churches that I had mentioned. There are also several non-Christians present here. Some of the non-Christians are actually hearing the gospel for the very first time in this particular lectureship. And so we had a good number of people there with us. Here I am introducing the first lesson in the Gospel of Mark. Here's one of my favorite pictures of Phil. Just timed that one right with his mouth open and his hands out. He is proclaiming the gospel, and he gets passionate sometimes as he preaches and teaches God's word. And so I was thankful to be able to get that picture. Here are 2 Moldovans, and I say Moldovans with a little bit different tone because the lady on the left here, her name is Lena. She was born and raised in Moldova, but several years ago, Stacy and I introduced her to one of the children, the son of one of the shepherds at the church in Galena. And in 2014, or 2015 rather, I had the privilege of actually joining them in marriage. And so Lena is now a member of the Lord's Church in Galena, where we are also members. And her and her husband Ryan, we see them on a regular basis. Of course, saw them this morning. She happened to be visiting in Moldova. Her parents and her grandmother and other extended family members still live there. And this was the first trip she'd been able to make in 2 years, primarily because of COVID. So just think about going 2 years without seeing your family. She was really excited to be there, and it just worked out timing-wise that she was there during the lecture, so she was able to interpret some for us. This is Sergei Korchmaro. We'd mentioned him earlier. He's at the computer manning the Zoom, Skype, and Viber connections that I had mentioned, as well as showing the passages through eSword. And when we had PowerPoint slide decks, he was also manning those. We would take breaks, of course, for some of the meals that we would have. By the way, that's not wine. It just kind of struck me that someone may wind up thinking that's actually compote, which is a very common juice drink. You boil fruit and add sugar to it and water, and it's a very common drink there. So we're eating there with the Korchmaro family. As Sergei, his wife Anna, their son Paul, and Vicky's not in this picture, but that's their daughter. On Friday, again, we continued with the lectures. Phil took this picture of me transferring some notes from one Bible to another Bible before I got up to lecture. Again, continuing with the Gospel of Mark. On Thursday evening and Friday evening, we spent some time looking at a new hymnal. Some of you who read the reports that I send out will have seen some things about a new hymnal. And so I put together kind of a prototype with 6 or 7 hymns before I got too far. I wanted them to see what I was thinking, to see where I was going with this. And so we talked about that. We got some good feedback from that. And here's kind of a basic approach to what we're doing with this hymnal. This is the hymn, Revive Us Again. This is going to be a trilingual hymnal, and the first verse or the first stanza will appear actually with the music, which is what you see here. So we have the first stanza in Russian, the first stanza in Romanian, and then the first stanza in English. And then at the bottom, if there is room, or on the next page, will be the remaining stanzas just with the text. And so just like they would have sung before 1850, when there was no words and music that were together, they can sing from them. We are continuing to work on this project. We've got 100 hymns that we're working with now to try to get things set up. We're actually going to release just a text version of these 100 hymns. That was one of the things that they provided feedback concerning. Some of them, most of them can't read music, and so they just memorize the tunes anyway. And so they asked about just having a version of the hymnal that was only words. So we're going to provide that for them first, and then be able to come back and provide this kind of layout here. We also spent some time during one of the lessons, I forget which one now, I brought up this idea. This is a series of sermons that I'm actually in the middle of now, or toward the end of this series now. I took some information from Patrick Lencioni and a book that he has called The Ideal Team Player. And I started talking about the ideal disciple. That's what that TID is. And the 3 characteristics I think of an ideal disciple is someone who is humble, hungry, and smart. Smart there means people smart. And just because I know you're curious about what's going on here, the other words and other colors and things going on, if you have someone who is only humble, but is not who is not hungry or smart, they're like a pawn, can be moved anywhere. Someone who is hungry but not humble or smart is a bulldozer. Someone who is smart, that is people smart, but not humble or hungry, is a charmer. Those are kind of rare, but it's not uncommon to find people that have 2 characteristics out of these 3. And so someone who is humble and hungry, but not very smart, is an accidental messmaker. Someone who is hungry and smart but not humble is a skillful politician. And someone who is humble and smart but not hungry is a lovable slacker. And these are read for a reason, because when you have 2 or 2 of these 3 characteristics and not the third, you will cause problems. Now, the lovable slacker, he causes problems primarily because he doesn't pull his weight. The accidental messmaker causes problems because he makes messes that have to be cleaned up, even though he's not doing it on purpose. Those are dangerous, but I want to suggest to you that the most dangerous situation in the lives of a disciple of Jesus Christ or members of a local congregation is this category down here, the skillful politician. And by a politician, we're not talking about politics in the sense of government. We're talking about someone who tries to make a way for themselves. And those of you that have worked office jobs or worked in competing kind of situations, you've probably seen some skillful politicians. I really believe, if you'll turn in your Bibles to 3 John, I really believe Diotrephes was a skillful politician, and I'll explain why here in just a moment. But in 3 John, we're going to read together verses 9 and 10, where John speaks of Diotrephes. Again, 3 John, beginning in verse 9, I wrote the church, this is John speaking to the church, I wrote the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to have the preeminence among them, does not receive us. Therefore, if I come, I will call to mind his deeds which he does, prating against us with malicious words. And not content with that, he himself does not receive the brethren, and forbids those who wish to, putting them out of the church. Now, when we think about the skillful politician, the reason he is able to continue to do what he does is because he is smart. He's able to charm people. He's actually, because he is so smart, he's able to convince people that he is humble when he actually isn't. And so for months or even years, the skillful politician can be in some kind of relationship, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's on some kind of sports team, or whether it's in a local congregation. And when things finally are realized that this guy is actually not humble, this guy is just trying to find a place for himself, all along the way throughout the history, you can probably find dead bodies buried in the closet. That's this kind of person that we're talking about here. Again, they make people think that they're humble because they're so people smart, and because they're so hungry, they're so driven, they want the preeminence, they want the position. And that's exactly what happened with Diotrephes. I promise you, and you can ask John when you see him, because I don't think you'll probably be seeing Diotrephes, though I hope you do. But you can ask John when you see him. And I think Diotrephes did not set out in this local church to say, hey, I want to be the big dog here. I want to be the guy that's in charge. And you're going to listen to me, and I don't care what you think. You're going to do what I say. He didn't go in talking like that. He went in charming the people. He went in being very smart. And as a result of that, coupled with his hunger, with his desire to have the preeminence, eventually he worked his way to that position. But again, it's obvious that he's not humble here because of how he controls the situation, not working with the apostles, working against the apostles, and so forth. So, because I had brought some of this up in one of the lessons that we were going through with the Gospel of Mark, they wanted to know more about that, so we spent some time Thursday during the Q&A and Friday during the Q&A as well. And then moving to Saturday. Saturday was a busy day for us. We did finish up a study. I'm here talking about some textual criticism things in this lesson, but particularly thinking about the latter part of the end of Mark. But that, some of you who probably going back to 2008, maybe you heard of first century Mark, and some discovery, and depending upon what you heard, it may have been something connected with Hobby Lobby or the Bible Museum or mummy masks or things like that. Ron Daly, I think, actually had the opportunity to see some of this text in person at one point. But there was a lot of stuff going on the internet. It's a very long story. But this was finally released a couple of years ago, maybe just last year, but I think it was 2019. COVID makes everything run together. And this is probably not from the first century, but these are the fragments that they were talking about. It actually contains a part of Mark chapter 1. But it probably is mid-2nd century, and if it is mid-2nd century, it's still the oldest manuscript, the oldest fragment of any of the Gospels except for one very small fragment of the Gospel of John. But it's the oldest fragment of the Gospel of Mark, and again, maybe the second oldest fragment of the Gospels in their entirety. So it's pretty cool that we have something like that going back that far. As we ended the conference, this particular lady here, her name is Vera, which is the Russian word for faith. And Vera was thanking us, but she's also thanking you. And I wanted to include this picture because she spoke to you. She wanted to make sure that we talked to all of the people who made it possible for Philip and I to be able to go to Moldova and to be able to spend some time with the brethren there. And so she's thanking you. Of course, you can see she's wearing her American outfit. She actually had a very similar outfit on Thursday morning when she came up to me. Of course, we hugged. We said, hello, how are you? And kind of caught up. But then she was a little bit upset because I didn't notice her American shirt that she had worn just for us. So I want to make sure that I point that out here so that you notice her American shirt there. But she was thankful. She is one of the sisters in the city of Tiraspol. Her and her husband, Vasily, are very hospitable people. She is a joy to be around. They've opened up their home. I've stayed in their home several times. My father and I have stayed there together at various times as well. Her husband, Vasily, some of you may find fascinating. He is or was an Olympic runner. Actually carried the torch for the Soviet Union during one of the World Olympics. He still today has records that are on the book that no one has beaten him in yet. So he's kind of a fascinating person. And I will just add this in thinking about that. Most of us probably don't know Olympic athletes, and we don't have to. But so his name is Vasily Nikolaev, and he was one of the first converts in the area of Transnistria, again with the city of both Benderi and the city of Tiraspol. Well, Vasily Nikolaev, after he got to the point where he wasn't actually running races himself, he started training people to be able to run races, and especially training those who would run in the Paralympics. Well, one of his co-workers, one of his co-coaches, his name is Vasily Vladov. And because he worked with Vasily Vladov in running, Vasily Vladov was converted. The first person I had the blessing of being able to baptize or to participate in his baptism when we were in Moldova back in January of 2006, his name was Nikolai, and he was being trained by Vasily and Vasily. And actually, Nikolai ran in the Paralympics down in Atlanta. Matter of fact, his name is there in the Olympic Park, which is kind of cool. Now, I say all of that to say we've got a runner, or a running coach, and a running coach, and a runner that are all converts. If you back up to the church in Chisinau, you're going to find, I think, 5 members that have PhDs, some of them that have 2 PhDs. Why is that? It's because they're talking to people that they're working with. They're talking to people that they're rubbing elbows with, and they're converting those people. And so the church in Chisinau, those are the PhDs, those are the scientists. There's some microbiologists, there's some DNA specialists there, and some other scientists there. The church in Benderi and the church in Tiraspol, that's the running church because there's a bunch of runners there. And I find that fascinating to just see how they just take the gospel wherever they are. As they're going about their daily lives, they are talking to people that they know, people that they care about, people that they already have relationships with, and the gospel is being spread in that way. Here's a picture of some of the participants, not all of them that were at the conference. This man here on the left, Ivan. Ivan showed up on the very last day toward the very end, and I did not have a chance to really spend some time with him. His son lives in the United States, in Michigan, and I'd been corresponding some with him. And to the son's knowledge, Ivan had not participated or not been a part of any Bible study, any worship service, or nothing. So this was his very first time, and he got to meet all of these people here. And Sergey is continuing to study with him, and so hopefully we'll see some good things come from that. Because of COVID and because of rules, also on Saturday, Philip and I had to have our COVID-19 test. They were negative. We got to come back at the proper time. And then we had a young people's discussion on Friday evening. And I let Philip kind of take the lead on that discussion because one of the deacons with the church in Edna had actually come up with a series of 5 questions to help young people make decisions as they go through their daily lives. And I wanted the young people, Philip and I wanted the young people to understand these questions. So here are the 5 questions. Number 1, does my conscience say this is wrong? Romans 14, verse 5 and verse 23. Number 2, does the Bible say it is wrong specifically or in principle? Galatians 5, 19 through 21, or Romans 13 and verse 10. Number 3, will this keep me from doing what I have an obligation or duty to do? That is, not allow me to do what I should. Matthew 6, 33, Ephesians 5, 15 and 16, and James 4, 17. Question 4, will this influence me negatively, harm my ability to influence others positively, or make me a stumbling block to others? 1 Corinthians 15, 33, Matthew 18, 6 and 7, and Matthew 5, 13 through 16. And question number 5, what kind of fruit, as consequences, will this produce? Galatians 5:19 through 23. So we took these questions and we worked through them with the young people there, and we had some really good discussion. I was really thankful for how open and transparent these young people were about their struggles, about their difficulties, even about their struggles and difficulties related to some of these questions. And it was just a really good discussion. Here are some of the young people with Philip. We met at the Korchmaru's house. This is their living room. And so, again, as we were studying about these things, they were asking some really good questions, and we just had some really good discussion. So very thankful for that. Hopefully that was something that was helpful to them. We've been trying to do that recently, spend more time with the younger people, have special classes for them, and we're seeing some good things come from that. On the Lord's Day, August the 29th, we had the opportunity to split up in the way that they have arranged worship services there. The church in Chisinau only meets on Sunday evening so that the men from Chisinau can travel to these other churches in the morning and to be able to help them with their worship services and preaching and leading in worship. And initially, I was going to go to Belts, and Phil was going to go and meet with the church in Bendary. We've been trying to swap, but the church in Bendary actually asked me to come to address a specific situation that I'll explain in just a moment. So Phil actually had the blessing of going again and worshiping with the church in Belts. And the church in Belts is made up of primarily women. That man there, his name is Victor. He would find it funny that I mentioned primarily women, and there his picture was. Victor is not a member there. Victor's a member of the church in Chisinau, and I'll come back and talk about Victor in just a moment. Victor was Phil's driver, and that's why Victor is there on this particular occasion. The church meets in the house of Dora, and this is Dora here in the middle. And so this is her living room where they are here. And so the church meets there, and Philip had the chance to meet and to worship with them and to present a lesson there. As I mentioned, I had the opportunity to visit with the church in Bendary again, which is one of the cities in Transnistria, the breakaway republic on the east side of Moldova. Here's a picture of where they meet. This is Vasily Vladov. He actually does the bulk of the preaching and teaching with the church there. I had the blessing, I forget what year it was, 2000, well, I don't know, something. And so let me tell you just a little bit of background. Before the Cold War ended, we had lots of American brethren that were praying for the Cold War to end so that the gospel could be taken to the Soviet Union, where it had not gone for 2 generations. And some of these brethren were making preparations. They were diligently praying and knew God was going to answer their prayer, so they were getting themselves prepared and ready. They made sure they had passports that were ready to go. Some of them actually went back to college to take Russian so that they would be able to actually speak with the people there. They started translating material before the Cold War ever even ended to make sure that they had things that they needed. And I'll come back to that material in just a second. But the very first trip that I know of included Phil Morgan and I think Greg Gwynn. I know it was Phil and one other man. And they went to Moscow after the Cold War ended. And this was a scouting trip. They were spying out the land. They wanted to go and see, how do we actually study with people? I mean, where do we meet with them? How do we go about actually having food and being able to sleep and just kind of the basic necessities? What do we do? And so they go in. And one of the things that they do is they get a map of the city to be able to figure out how they can get from one point to another with the public transportation. And when they come back out, they have this map, and they're trying to make sense of it. And they both speak Russian, and they can read the map. But nothing's making sense. They can't get from where they need to go to where they want to go, or from where they are to where they want to go. And they're on this park bench, and they're talking about this. And there's this elderly lady sitting behind them on the park bench, and she says, "Yeah, you're Americans, and so many of the Russians don't want Americans here. So when they see an American coming in, they actually give them a fake map." And so they'll get frustrated, and they'll tell their friends, "Hey, it's a very frustrating city. You don't want to go there. Go somewhere else." So she said, "I'll go into the bookstore, and I'll get a for real map for you." So she did, and they were able to get things figured out. And incidentally, Sergei was actually converted in Moscow. He was working on his PhD in microbiology at one of the universities there, and was an atheist, but wanted to brush up on his English and volunteered to be able to interpret for some of the people who were giving lectures at the university there, some of the Christians giving lectures, and asked, how can you believe in God? Science has disproven God. They gave him some material. They studied with him. He came back and said, I have no choice but to believe in God once he examined the actual evidence. And so that's Sergei's conversion. Well, coming back to the material that was translated, one of the things that was translated was a Bible timeline showing the scheme of redemption from beginning to end on kind of a scroll. And Phil Morgan and I were visiting one time, and we were with the church that met at that time in the city of Tiraspol. And Vasily Vladov, we had given a copy of this timeline to him on Thursday, I think it was, maybe Thursday of the conference. And so he was going to present something on Sunday when we were there. So we sat down. Phil and I speak a little bit of Russian, but we still typically have some kind of interpreter with us just to make sure. But Vasily started preaching, and he was preaching through this timeline. He was preaching the scheme of redemption, and we told the interpreter, be quiet. We know exactly what he's saying because he's preaching the scheme of redemption. So I had the blessing of actually hearing Vasily's very first sermon where he preached the scheme of redemption. He's a good man. He does a lot of good work there. He actually is getting over COVID right now. One of the young ladies that he took into his home, her and her brother when they were children, it's a very terrible story. Her and her husband now, she had gotten COVID, and Vasily wound up getting COVID. He was pretty bad there for a day or so, but I heard yesterday that he's doing much better now. Here are some of the people that were there. Actually, this is the lady Lena that had the COVID last week as well that started the situation. That's her husband Sergei there. And again, there is Vasily. There are several people who are not there, some who are still concerned about getting out because of COVID, some who were away traveling, and other things. Now, the reason why the church in Bandari asked me to come is because of this. And what this is a copy of one of the deeds. The church's meeting place is on two separate pieces of property. The church in Bandari was started by institutional churches and connected with one of the preaching schools in the city of Kiev, Ukraine. And they had come down, they wanted to start branching over into Moldova. And so, as some of the institutional brethren do, they will go buy a piece of property, build a really fancy building. They will bring lots of good things for people in the area. They will have these very large meals and invite all these people from the area. So at this particular meeting place, it was not uncommon when they were doing that for there to be 200 or 300 people from the local community coming in, getting the free clothes, the free medicine, the free food, which there's nothing wrong with helping people out with clothes, medicine, and food as we think about individuals helping in benevolence. So I'm not at all trying to say anything negative about that. But in this specific situation, they were trying to basically buy people's conversion. And I say it that way because they said they baptized 160 people. Yeah, there are about 12 to 15 people that are still meeting. Among those 160 people that we had the chance to actually talk to later, some of them were like, I don't think Jesus was actually real. And they had been baptized. One guy said, yeah, I mean, Jesus was indeed real, but there's no way he was raised from the dead. People are not raised from the dead, and yet he was baptized. And so, again, we find several situations like that. Well, the way that they went about doing or building this particular piece of property is both of the pieces of property, including the one that the church's meeting place is on, is in the name of American institutional preachers. And because that is the case, the church in Bandari actually can't do anything with the meeting place now. They severed ties with these individuals several years ago after we had studied with them for 2 or 3 years about some of these things. It's a much longer story, but they can't change utilities. They need to have some repairs made to the roof. It's leaking and it's coming into where they meet. They can't even get work permits to be able to do that because their name is not on the deed. And so they asked me, what am I supposed to do? Or what are we supposed to do? And I'm like, I don't know, but I'll see what I can do. I have no idea. I've never dealt with international land purchases before, or deeds or anything like that. So the elders back in Galena and I, we've met. We've got some things that we're working on. Hopefully that will get worked out soon. Please be praying for that. We had the opportunity to meet with the church in Chisinau again that evening. Here are some of the people who were present. Phil was preaching, again, dealing with evidences pertaining to Jesus. Here we are in between the worship and the Bible class period, just getting caught up with some of the people there. And then Monday, before we left on Tuesday morning, we spent the day getting our stuff together and getting ready to go, but then we spent several hours, most of the afternoon, from about 2 o'clock on, with this family here. This is Victor and his wife, Nellie. This is their daughter, Lena, that I had mentioned earlier, and this is Nellie's mother, Helen, basically, is how we would say that. And Victor and Nellie are very poor. Victor's actually preaching some now, and so he's being helped in some of that, and so some of their poverty is being alleviated through that particular way. But very poor to the point that they would go without food oftentimes for various reasons. Victor is a cab driver, but he refuses to get sucked into more of the mafia-esque aspect of cab driving, and he doesn't want to work for one of the bigger cab driving companies. So he's an independent cab driver, and sometimes he does pretty good, sometimes he doesn't. But they've always been hospitable to us. We love them dearly. They were in our home often when we were there. We were in their home. But their home, when you walk in, you have a foyer that's about as big as that from that pew to here. They've got one other room that's that same size, and they have a kitchen that's about half that size, and that's it. That's their entire place except for a small bathroom. And so we're in kind of the living room area there. But again, they were very hospitable with us. Here's a picture again of Victor and his wife, Nellie. Victor, it took him a long time to obey the gospel. So Lena was the first of the family to obey the gospel. This goes back to 2008, I think it was. Steve and Justin Montz, Brace Rutledge, and myself had made a trip to Moldova, and just 2 or 3 weeks prior to that, Lena had obeyed the gospel. She's got a very fascinating story as well. She was seeking the truth. She's in her late teens or her early 20s seeking the truth. She's studying the Bible. She's out on the internet looking for things. She went to these charismatic events. She went to this large event. She went to several things trying to find the truth, knew that was not the truth. She eventually stumbled upon the website. She was fluent in English, and so she stumbled on the website of a sound church down in Georgia and started taking the correspondence course that they were offering and studying with one of the sisters there with this local church who has now passed on. And she got to the point where she realized, this is the truth. I can see this in the Bible. I know this is what I'm supposed to do. And so she wanted to obey the gospel. And so she's studying with this sister from Georgia. The sister from Georgia sends out all these emails. Does anybody know anybody anywhere near Moldova? We've got this young lady who wants to be baptized. Well, somebody said, yeah, we know Sergei Korchmaru. And so it turns out they literally lived in the apartment buildings that were right next door to each other. But it took Lena studying with a sister here in the States to come to Christ, but then Sergei baptized her into Christ. So again, this was like January 2008. And so when we get there, Lena has just obeyed the gospel. During that trip, her mother, Nellie, obeys the gospel. We had the pleasure of baptizing her. But her husband, Victor, he wouldn't even step foot in any of our studies or nothing like that. He wouldn't go to any of the get-togethers that any of the Christians had outside of the church's regular meetings either until we moved there. And when we moved there, he started coming into our home and started opening up. And by the time we left, he was visiting with the church there. And then 2 years ago, when Philip and I were there, and a couple of the sisters from Galena were also there with us. And I had presented a lesson. I forget what the lesson was on. And some of what I had to say was directed specifically toward Victor. So after the lesson, I actually approached them and basically asked them, how come you haven't been baptized? And so that really kind of struck him. And he went home and was studying. And I don't know if he went to sleep that night or not, but the very first thing the next morning, he says, I need to be baptized. And so Sergei took him and baptized him actually in the Dniester River just a few minutes away. And he has been on fire since then, except that he's not a preacher. He's a cab driver. He's never been a preacher. He's not the son of a preacher. He has no idea. He's never been involved in anything like this ever. But he was approached about maybe presenting some lessons locally, and he did. He's approached about helping out with the sisters up in Belts. He has lots of family that live up in that area, and so he travels up there, and he's very familiar with that area. And at first he said no, and he finally, about 5 or 6 months ago, decided that he would. And so we spent some time talking with him whenever we were there about his work, and I asked him, I said, so how do you go out preparing your lessons? How do you choose what you're presenting on? He said, well, basically, I know I've got problems. I know I got things I need to work on, and so I just go to the Bible and say, hey, how does the Bible help me with my problems and the things I need to work on? And I put together a lesson based on that, and I go with the sisters in Belt and say, hey, I've got this problem. You may have this problem too. Here's what the Bible teaches us about that. And that's how he presents his lessons. He had actually hurt his back and was out of commission for a couple of months, but thankfully he's actually been able to make 2 trips to Belt, including one today, to be able to preach and lead and worship with the church there. I wanted to spend some more time. I actually spent more time on those things than I had intended. I wanted to spend some more time on this. This was the passage, or part of the passage that was read earlier, where Paul says, I do not say this because I'm seeking a gift. Rather, I seek the credit of the fruit that abounds to your account. For I have received everything, and I have plenty. I have all I need because I received from Epaphroditus what you sent, a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice, very pleasing to God. And my God will supply your every need according to his glorious riches in Christ Jesus. May glory be given to God our Father forever and ever. Amen. This trip, any fruit from this trip goes into the account of individuals here and of this local church here. And I want you to know that. And so here are some things as Phil and I talked about this, as we talked with the people there, that you need to know that you did, that you participated in, that you had fellowship in. There were multiple people that actually said this was a shot in the arm after COVID. They weren't able to meet together. It was actually forbidden in Moldova for them to be able to get together in groups of larger than 3 people. And so again, they had to work through all of that in various ways, and this was something that just got them on fire again for serving the Lord. Connected with that, some of them said that these lessons, this trip, help us to refocus our priorities. How important is that? I mean, when we get our priorities out of whack and we're focused on the wrong things and we're headed in the wrong directions or the wrong direction, we're headed in the wrong direction, and we don't want to do that. We want to be turned around to the right direction. And so you were able to help them to do this. Some of them said that this was the perfect balance of text and application. Now, I'm not saying that boasting. I'm saying that this has taken me years to get anybody to say that, because it is so easy for me to just study, digest information, and regurgitate a bunch of information. That's what's easy for me. Trying to make lessons applicable has been very difficult for me, including in Moldova. Well, as they would say, we don't want all of the theoretic lessons. We want something that we can actually do something with in our daily lives. And thanks to your support, in our regular support, and thanks for your support on this, they were able to walk away from the Gospel of Mark saying, yeah, there are some really cool things going on within the text here, and we understand that better now, but we also can see how we can live this out in our lives. And so you were able to do that. There were 5 or 6 non-Christians present at several of these studies, so the seed was planted in some of them, was watered in others. They were excited and interested in learning. One lady, she was just constantly smiling. She'd be reading something, hearing something, and you could just see the joy on her face, hearing these things for the first time in her life, and that was very fascinating, and you did that. We saw also among the local churches, the churches in Belts and the church in Bendarian, signs of them being tight and united and devoted groups, and we were thankful for that. There's growth taking place there. The church in the city of Chisinau, signs of closeness and unity, and them spending more time together outside of the worship services, and we saw several things that were good with that situation. The young people, throughout all of the lessons, all of the lectures, and the young people study, they showed great interest. There was good questions. There was open vulnerability. That is, they were willing to say, hey, we're struggling with this. Or sometimes, maybe even several times, they actually pushed back and said, we don't understand. Our parents say this, my grandparents say this, but I can't read that in the Bible. We need to know what's going on here. And we think we're just going to stick with the Bible. And so we dealt with some of that and helped them hopefully to bridge the gap with some of that. So lots of good discussions there. There were several of the Christians, including some of those that do some of the preaching and teaching, that were admitting an openness to change. That may be a weird way to word that, but what we saw here were people that in times past did not have the humility to say, I'm wrong, or I was wrong. They didn't have the humility to say that, okay, I've been putting all my effort and energy in this direction, but I now realize I shouldn't have been. Let's change course. And that takes humility. It is easy for any of us, wherever we live, to kind of buckle up and our pride to come through and nope, never saying that I'm wrong, never admitting to anything wrong, not changing anything that I'm wanting to do. And I'm telling you, that's no way to live. And there's no way any congregation can thrive or flourish if you have multiple people like that. So this was exciting to see some of these preachers and teachers that were willing to say, yeah, we've messed up, we made some mistakes, we certainly recognize that. So we were excited about that. I've already mentioned Victor there. Let me just quickly touch on some future trips, and then if there are some questions, maybe after the closing prayer, we can talk about those then. Thank you for your patience, by the way. I see some of you looking at your watches, and that's okay. I understand. It's a longer presentation. Because of our recent move to Galena, we're able to make multiple trips. I still have some young kids at home. My three youngest are actually here with us. Our three oldest are still up in Indiana because of their jobs. And as the younger kids get older, we'll be making some more trips. Stacy's going with me some. She'll be going with me more. And so I want to talk to you about some of these trips. We're going to start making a trip in the spring and a trip in the fall. And the trip in the spring, we're going to focus on more evangelistic efforts. The trip in the fall will be more edification efforts. So Lord willing, April the 10th through the 22nd, my father, Randy, which most of you know, Philip Stuckey, we're going to be traveling first to Lithuania and working with Brother Kestutis there. His wife recently passed away. And other things have happened in connection with COVID and some other stuff. We want to try to bring some energy to Brother Kestutis and to the work there. Then we're going to Moldova. And from an evangelistic standpoint, there are actually three other groups in Chisinau that have some kind of connection to the church, but that we don't really work with. We don't really have anything to do with. There's a longer story behind each of these, but we want to meet with them. We want to talk with them. We want to see where we are common ground-wise, maybe see where some differences are, see if we can't study, at least begin communication, open up doors of communication here, and in one of the cases, reopen doors of communication for them, and to see what we can do there. Then, Lord willing, in August, probably early August, Stacy, our oldest son Jacob, Philip, and Philip's oldest daughter will be making a trip with, again, primarily focused on the lectures. Philip and I, sometimes we have worked together in preparations for our sermons as far as themes go. We'll brainstorm together, and then we'll each write our own individual sermons after the brainstorming sessions. And so for 2 years, we had a monthly theme of having and defending a biblical worldview, so 24 lessons. And we're going to present some of that during this particular lectureship, Lord willing, next August. Then in the spring of 23, we're going to be looking at some evangelistic efforts and some restoration efforts in Iași, which is a city in the country of Romania. And it sits basically here. The country of Moldova used to be a part of Romania, and when it was, Iași was the capital of the state of Moldavia. And so it's not that far. There used to be a church that met there, but they're no longer meeting. We want to go and try to meet with some of the brethren there that have fallen away and see what we can do about trying to help them to start meeting again and to encourage them and to be restored, and some other evangelistic efforts. And then in the fall of 23, we're going to be talking about Paul's epistles. We try to alternate between textual and topical studies in these lectureships. I will mention here that Caleb Ray's probably going with us on that trip. Philip Stuckey and myself and Caleb Ray will be making this trip, Lord willing, in the fall of 23. So, it's a lot of information to take in this particular report. Thank you again for your attention, for your participation. Thank you all again for all of the prayers that were offered, all of the words of encouragement to my family, to myself, to Phil, and to others. And thank you for the support that you offered to make this trip possible. Again, there were several good things that happened. Lord willing, we'll continue to see fruit coming from this trip as well. As I mentioned, if you have any questions about these things, please feel free to let me know. We're going to sing the invitation hymn here in just a moment, number 286. Number 286. As we sing this hymn, we want everybody to be thinking about where you are in regards to your relationship with God. Sometimes people get excited, and you can take that in a negative or a positive way. When we talk about making trips to foreign countries to try to encourage and to evangelize in those particular places, I get that. You know, we got all kinds of people here locally who need to hear the gospel as well, absolutely. But I want to emphasize that it doesn't matter where you are. If you're in Moldova, if you're in the Philippines, if you're in India, if you're in China, if you're in South America, if you're right here in Cookeville, Tennessee, your soul is important. It doesn't matter where you are. And so right now, we went to these great lengths to talk about some of these people over there, but we will go to just as great lengths for anybody right here. If you're here this evening and your life is not right with God, you're not a faithful disciple of Jesus Christ, why not? This is the most important thing that you can make decisions about in your life. You need to be prepared for eternity. If you're here and you're not a believer in any sense of that particular word, thank you for coming. Again, a very unusual lesson, but we want you to think about the things that we talked about. The resurrection of Jesus is real. And because the resurrection of Jesus is real, then everything that you can read in the Word of God is also real. And because the resurrection of Jesus is real, that means He is coming back again someday. And when He comes back again someday, if you're not a true disciple of Jesus, you will not spend eternity with Him. You will instead spend eternity in hellfire prepared for the devil and his angels. I don't say that to be mean. I don't say that to scare you. I say that to be real. Jesus is real. His resurrection is real. And everything that I just said is just as real. And you need to be ready for that. Please take some time to sit down with somebody with open minds, open hearts, open Bibles, maybe some other sources to talk about evidences or whatever, and take the time to get to know and to explore whether or not the resurrection of Jesus is real. Come to a definitive answer for yourself about that question. Maybe you're here this evening and you believe the resurrection of Jesus is real, but you've never obeyed the gospel. You've never been baptized into Jesus. You've never committed yourself to Him in that way as a true disciple. If you know what you need to do to make your life right with Jesus, to obey the gospel, to be buried with Him in baptism, to become a true disciple of Jesus, don't wait. Do that this evening. There are people here who are ready to help you. We'll do whatever we can to make that happen this very night. There may be some here who have obeyed the gospel, have been Christians, disciples for several years, but for whatever reason, you're in a situation now where there is some sin in your life that is separating you from a right relationship with Jesus. The things that I said earlier about the resurrection of Jesus and His second coming and spending eternity with Him, and some who will spend eternity in hellfire, you need to think about those things too. If your life is not right with God, if you're not walking as a true disciple of Jesus right now, you need to repent of whatever sins stand between you and being a faithful disciple of Jesus. Pray to God for forgiveness and confess your sins. When we do, God is faithful and just to forgive us of our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter how bad you think you are. The blood of Jesus is more powerful than anything you have ever said or done. He will wash you clean this evening. Are you a faithful disciple of Jesus right now? If not, why not? We want to help you. If you'll let us know how we can help by coming forward as together we stand and as we sing.